Lonely rancher saved Apache woman from death. Her tribe called him sacred husband. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Arizona Territory, 1852. The land was vast and silent, a kingdom of red rock and endless sky, where a man could ride for days without seeing another soul. Somewhere between the jagged cliffs of the Dragoon Mountains, James Walker urged his bay horse through a narrow trail. He was no soldier, no lawman, no outlaw, just a rancher who preferred the company of cattle and coyotes to the noise of towns. Folks around Tucson called him a loner, a drifter with sky-colored eyes and a Bible tucked in his saddlebag. That morning, the desert had been too quiet. No wind in the mesquite trees, no hawks circling above. James felt the kind of silence that presses down like a warning. Then it came, sharp and sudden. An arrow split the air, hissing past his ear and burying itself in the rock with a deadly thud. His horse reared, eyes wide with terror. James grabbed the reins, heart pounding. From the cliffs above, the cry of Apache warriors echoed, raw and fierce, rolling like thunder across the canyon. Shadows moved on the ridge, bows drawn, spears flashing in the sun. He kicked his horse into a desperate run, dodging down the winding path as arrows rained around him. Dust choked his lungs. The canyon walls closed in. He knew he wouldn't make it far. Another arrow struck the saddle flap. A third sliced the brim of his hat clean away. He tasted death in the back of his throat. Then, in the chaos, something unexpected caught his eye. Not another warrior, not another arrow, but a body lying broken among the rocks ahead. His horse stumbled, and James was thrown hard into the sand. Dazed, he pushed himself up, hand groping for the Colt on his belt. But what he saw made him freeze. It was a woman. Her skin gleamed bronze beneath the desert sun. Raven-black hair, matted with blood, spilled across her shoulders. Beaded garments marked her not as any warrior, but as someone sacred, someone of rank. A shaft of an arrow protruded cruelly from her side, crimson soaking the ground beneath her. James's breath caught. The Apache war cries still roared above, their arrows still aimed at his heart. Yet his gaze locked on hers. Amber eyes, wide with pain, met his, eyes that should have burned with hatred, but instead flickered with a plea he understood without words. He could run, he could draw his pistol and fight until the end. But in that suspended moment, another voice rose within him, quiet, insistent, remembered from a childhood sermon in a small Kentucky chapel. Love your neighbor as yourself. Luke 10:27. James tore open his shirt, pressing the cloth hard against the bleeding wound. His hands shook, but he whispered low, almost to himself, "Stay with me. Don't you give up now." Above, the Apache warriors hesitated. They had expected an enemy's bullet. Instead, they saw a rancher on his knees, risking his life to save one of their own. The canyon held its breath. Destiny had begun. The world narrowed to the sound of her labored breathing. James pressed harder with the torn fabric, his palms slick with her blood. He had mended fences, branded cattle, even stitched his own wounds on the range, but never had his hands trembled the way they did now. Above him, silhouettes of warriors lined the ridge, bows drawn tight. One wrong move and a storm of arrows would finish him. Yet they did not release. Their dark eyes studied him from the heights, confusion etched in their painted faces. This white man, alone in their sacred canyon, was not killing, he was saving. The woman's eyelids fluttered. Her voice was a whisper, thin as desert wind. He couldn't understand her words, but he caught the meaning. Fear, pain, the will to live. "Hold on," James muttered, sweat dripping from his brow. "Don't you leave this world yet." He remembered nights on his lonely ranch when the silence grew too heavy, when the ache of emptiness gnawed at his soul. He had often prayed then, asking why God left him wandering without a family, without a place. Maybe, he thought now, this moment was the answer. "Lord," he whispered through dry lips, "guide my hands." The Apache war cries quieted. Only the harsh call of a raven broke the stillness. Slowly, one of the warriors descended from the rocks. His face was weathered by decades of sun and war, eyes sharp as obsidian. He carried no bow now, only the weight of judgment. James tensed, ready to be struck down. But the elder warrior knelt opposite him, touching the woman's forehead with reverence. He spoke a single word, his voice thick with grief. "Ayoka." James looked from the warrior to the girl. So that was her name. The elder's gaze burned into him, testing, searching. For years he had slain men like James without hesitation. Yet in the stranger's blue eyes he saw no hatred, no conquest, only desperate compassion. With a motion of his hand, the elder pointed toward a cluster of plants growing from the rocks. James understood at once. Crawling quickly, he tore them free and brought them back. The warrior crushed the leaves between stones, the air filling with the pungent scent of earth and rain. He motioned for James to press the green paste into the wound. James obeyed. The girl gasped, then stilled, her breathing shallow but steady. For the first time since the attack began, hope flickered. The elder raised his hand. On the ridge above, the drawn bows lowered. Silence swept the canyon like a tide. James exhaled, his chest heaving. He glanced down at Ayoka, her amber eyes half open, fixed on him with something beyond fear, something like recognition. A shiver passed through him, as though unseen threads of destiny had tightened around his soul. He was only a rancher, a wanderer without a home. Yet here, in the heart of Apache land, among enemies sworn to kill him, he felt an unshakable truth. He had not stumbled here by accident. The desert had led him, or perhaps it was God himself. To continue this adventure, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep creating. The canyon held a silence so heavy that James could hear the blood rushing in his ears. He kept pressing the paste of crushed herbs against Ayoka's wound, his hands sticky with her lifeblood. Above him, the Apache warriors remained still, their eyes unreadable. James expected death to strike at any moment, an arrow loosed, a blade thrown, but none came. Instead, the elder warrior crouched beside him. The man's face was carved by decades of desert sun and war. He spoke again, slowly, the word rolling like stone across the canyon. "Ayoka." He tapped the girl's chest, then touched James's hand where it held the wound. James swallowed. "Ayoka," he echoed, his voice rough. The elder's eyes narrowed, as if weighing the name on the stranger's lips. Then he spoke a string of words James couldn't follow. From the ridge, a second figure descended, a woman bent with age but steady in her step, carrying a pouch of dried herbs and feathers. Her presence silenced even the wind. She knelt by Ayoka, touching the girl's face, murmuring words in the Apache tongue. Then her gaze shifted to James, her eyes, clouded with years, fixed on his with startling intensity. She placed her hands over his, still pressed to the wound. The canyon air seemed to thicken. The warriors leaned forward. James felt as though the desert itself was waiting. The old woman spoke one phrase. He caught only two words. "Shash Tago," sky-eyed stranger. A murmur rippled through the warriors. Some bowed their heads, others clenched their fists. The elder warrior, still beside him, looked as if the earth had shifted beneath his feet. James blinked, uncertain. What did she say? His voice cracked, raw with fear and exhaustion. The elder warrior hesitated, then spoke in broken English, halting and heavy. Prophecy. Sky-eyed stranger, save the daughter of our people. The words struck James harder than any bullet. Him? A rancher with nothing but a few cattle and a past full of loneliness? He looked down at Ioka, her face pale against the red earth. Was she the daughter in the prophecy? His chest tightened. He remembered long nights on his ranch when the emptiness seemed unbearable, when he'd cried out to God for meaning. And now, here, in the midst of death, came whispers of destiny. He shook his head. No, I'm no savior. I just couldn't leave her to die. The medicine woman did not answer. Instead, she lifted her hands to the sky and began chanting in a voice that sounded older than the canyon itself. The warriors joined in, low and rhythmic, the sound echoing against the rock walls. James's skin prickled as if unseen eyes were watching from beyond the cliffs. Ioka stirred, her hand brushing against his wrist. Her eyes opened, amber and unsteady, but alive. She looked at him, not with hatred, but recognition. In that moment, James remembered words his mother once read to him, words he had not thought of in years. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Psalm 23:4. The verse whispered through him like water over stone. He was surrounded, outnumbered, caught in a prophecy he did not understand. Yet somehow he felt less alone. The medicine woman's chant ceased. She looked at James again and spoke in English, her voice cracked but clear. You are marked. James had ridden through deserts before, had seen the sweep of mesquite plains and the jagged teeth of mountain ridges. But nothing in his years as a rancher had prepared him for the journey that followed. At dawn, the warriors lifted Ioka onto a stretcher woven from willow branches and rawhide. James expected to be bound, dragged as a prisoner. Instead, the elder warrior, Nantan, as he would later learn, motioned for him to ride beside them. His rifle and revolver had been taken, but his hands were free. A strange kind of captivity, neither trusted guest nor condemned enemy. They moved along a trail so narrow it seemed carved by spirits, winding through red cliffs where the sun painted fire on every stone. James's horse followed the line of Apache ponies, hooves ringing softly against the rock. Overhead, a hawk circled, its cry carrying like a prayer across the canyon. For miles, they said nothing. The silence pressed on James, thick as the desert heat. He studied the warriors' faces. Young men painted for war, old men scarred by battles long past. None looked at him directly. He was a puzzle they had yet to solve. But when his gaze drifted to a hyoka, carried gently by two warriors, something in him shifted. Her eyes were closed, breath shallow but steady. He remembered her fingers brushing his wrist the night before, the fragile strength in that touch. Somehow, her survival felt bound to his own. By midday, they reached a plateau where the land opened like a hidden world. James pulled his horse short, struck silent. Below stretched a valley no map had ever shown, waterfalls spilling from cliffs into pools of clear turquoise, meadows green with tall grass, deer grazing unafraid. Cottonwoods shimmered along a winding stream, their leaves flashing silver in the sun. The Apache riders pressed forward without pause, but James lingered, awe tightening his chest. "It's paradise," he whispered. Nantan, riding close, turned his head. His English was rough, but the meaning came through. "This, our mother, she give us all." He swept a hand toward the valley. His eyes, dark and sharp, measured James's reaction. James nodded, throat dry. For the first time, he understood why these people fought with such ferocity. This was not just land, it was breath, blood, memory. No barbed wire fence or government treaty could own it. As they descended into the valley, the air cooled, filled with the scent of pine and sage. Children darted between the trees, their laughter carrying like bells. Women stopped their work to watch, curiosity plain on their faces. James felt every eye upon him, the stranger, the sky-eyed rancher walking into their sacred heart. He straightened in his saddle, though weariness gnawed at his bones. He recalled the sermons of his youth, when the preacher spoke of Eden, a garden untouched by sin. This valley felt the same, untamed, whole, shimmering with a beauty beyond human making. Yet he knew paradise could not last forever. Somewhere beyond these mountains, soldiers marched, carrying rifles and flags under the banner of manifest destiny. He had once believed, as many did, that westward expansion was God's will. But here, looking at the land through Apache eyes, he felt the first crack in that certainty. Perhaps God's will was not conquest, but something else entirely. The hidden valley narrowed into a clearing where the Apache village rested like a living part of the earth. Lodges of bent willow poles and hides blended with the trees, their smoke rising in thin ribbons toward the sky. Chickens darted near cook fires. Dogs barked as James rode in, then fell silent as if sensing the weight of the moment. The warriors halted at the center of the camp. Children crowded near, staring wide-eyed at the stranger with pale eyes and the dust-stained shirt. Women whispered, some clutching their infants tighter. James felt their gazes like thorns in his skin. He wanted to tip his hat in respect, but the gesture felt clumsy, out of place. Then the murmur hushed. The medicine woman stepped forward, the same who had spoken of prophecy in the canyon. Her name, whispered among the people, was Sani. Bent with age, hair braided with turquoise beads, she walked with the authority of centuries. Even the warriors bowed their heads as she passed. Sani stopped before James. She lifted his hands, palms still stained with Ayoka's blood, and studied them as though reading a book written long ago. The silence deepened until James could hear only the crackle of a nearby fire. Finally, she closed her eyes and murmured words in Apache, voice rising and falling like a hymn. When she opened them again, her gaze was wet with tears. "He has sacred hands," she declared in English, her voice trembling but sure. A ripple swept through the crowd. Some nodded, reverent. Others frowned, doubtful. James felt heat crawl up his neck. Sacred hands? He was just a rancher. His calluses came from roping cattle, not from any divine touch. "I ain't sacred," he muttered under his breath. But his protest vanished under the weight of so many eyes. Nantan stepped forward, his face unreadable. Sacred or cursed, we will see. But the prophecies speak. "He save Ayoka." At that, 2 young men carried Ayoka from the stretcher into the lodge nearest the fire. Her breaths were shallow, her face pale as ivory, but her eyes fluttered open at the sight of James. For the briefest heartbeat, their gazes locked, hers soft with recognition, his heavy with doubt. Then she was taken inside, away from him. The people's attention returned to James. A chorus of voices rose in Apache, some sharp with anger, others low with uncertainty. He caught only fragments, but he knew the meaning. Should we trust him? Should we kill him? Sweat ran cold down his back. He was no longer merely a captive. He was standing trial before a nation. Sani lifted her hand, and the noise ebbed. She spoke slowly, so even James could understand. "The spirits will judge. If he walks the right path, he will live. If not—" Her hand fell, like an axe cleaving wood. The crowd parted, and James saw a circle of stones at the far side of the clearing. Smoke drifted above it, heavy with sage. It was no ordinary fire pit. It was a place of testing. James's stomach tightened. He had asked God once for a purpose, for something beyond lonely nights on a ranch. Now purpose had found him, whether he wanted it or not. The days that followed were unlike anything James had known on the wide, empty range. He was not locked away, nor was he free to leave. Instead, he was placed under the watchful eye of Nanton. Wherever James went, the old warrior followed, silent as a shadow. At first, the village regarded him with suspicion. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts. Young warriors spat in the dust when he passed. Yet others, curious more than hostile, studied him closely. The way he saddled his horse, the way he handled a rope, the way he spoke. He was no soldier, no miner, no prospector, just a man of the land, like themselves. Each day, Sani visited Ioka, and James was allowed to bring water or cut wood nearby. When he glimpsed her through the open flap of the lodge, lying pale but alive, he felt a pull deeper than duty. She was still fighting, and so must he. The tribe put him to small tasks. He carried water from the stream, hauled logs for the fires, and tended the ponies. His hands, hardened from years of ranch work, found the rhythm quickly. The Apache watched with cautious approval. A man who worked with his hands was a man worth something. One evening, Nanton handed him a bow. James frowned, awkward with the weapon, but the elder motioned toward a row of gourds set on stumps. The warriors gathered, curious. James loosed an arrow. It missed by yards. Laughter rippled. Nanton grunted and showed him again, patient but stern. By the third try, James struck a gourd, splitting it wide. The laughter turned to murmurs. Later, by the fire, Nanton pointed at James's chest, then at the stars. "Alone," he said in broken English, his voice low. "Like Coyote, you walk by yourself." James stared into the flames. The words cut deeper than the old man knew. Alone. That had been his life since boyhood, working the ranch with no kin to share it, eating suppers in silence, hearing only the wind for company. He had built fences, herded cattle, survived storms, but never belonged. He met Nanton's eyes. "Maybe," he admitted softly, "but maybe I ain't meant to stay alone." Nanton said nothing, but his gaze lingered, as if weighing the truth of the words. The following morning, a group of children crept near as James whittled a stick into the shape of a horse. When he held it out, they hesitated. Then one boy snatched it and ran, laughing. Soon the others crowded close, begging for more. Their laughter lifted a weight from James's chest. For the first time since entering the valley, he felt welcome. That night, as he lay on a bed of furs, James thought of his mother reading by lamplight back in Kentucky. She had spoken often of how God set the lonely in families, how He built homes from broken lives. James closed his eyes, hearing the whispers of the village outside, the beat of a distant drum. Perhaps this was what she had meant all along. Ioka's strength returned slowly, like a fire coaxed from fading embers. Each day she sat longer in the sunlight outside her lodge, her skin warm with color again, her eyes clearer. James often found reasons to pass by, bringing water, stacking wood, or tending the ponies that grazed near the stream. At first, they exchanged only glances, her gaze curious, his hesitant. But as days folded into weeks, words began to bridge the silence. She taught him small phrases in Apache: water, sun, friend. He stumbled over the sounds, and she laughed softly, the sound like wind chimes stirring after a storm. When he finally managed to shape a word correctly, her smile shone with pride. In return, James taught her English words: horse, river, sky. She repeated them carefully, her accent bending them into something new and beautiful. Sometimes she touched her chest and spoke her name slowly, Ioka. Then she pointed at him, James. The way she said it carried a gentleness he had never heard from anyone before. One afternoon, he brought her a carving, a small horse shaped from cedar, polished smooth. She held it in her palms as though it were made of glass, her amber eyes glistening. "Sacred hands," she whispered, repeating Sani's words. James shook his head, embarrassed. "I'm no holy man," he muttered, "just a rancher who's got more scars than cattle." Her eyes lingered on him, steady and searching. "Hands, save," she said in halting English. She placed the carving against her chest. "Save me." James's throat tightened. He wanted to tell her that any decent man would have done the same, that he wasn't chosen by spirits or destiny. But the words died unspoken. Something in her gaze unsettled him. Not gratitude alone, but a recognition that reached deeper, as though she saw the parts of him he had hidden from himself. That night, he sat by the fire while Nantan sharpened a blade beside him. The elder's eyes flicked to Ioka across the clearing, then back to James. His voice, though low, carried a blade's edge. "She promised," he said in English thick with accent. James frowned. "Promised?" Nantan's jaw tightened. "Promised to warrior, strong man, alliance for tribes." He spat into the dirt. "Now broken." The words hit James harder than he expected. Ioka was not simply the daughter of a chief, nor merely a woman healed by his hands. She was bound by promises older than either of them. To claim her would mean tearing at the fabric of her people's future. Later, as the moon rose, James found her sitting by the stream. The water shimmered silver around her, the night alive with crickets and the distant call of an owl. She looked up when he approached, a question in her eyes. James lowered himself onto a rock nearby, silent for a long moment. "I ain't sure why I'm here," he said finally, voice rough. "Maybe it's chance, maybe it's God. But every time I see you, I feel like I've been walking my whole life just to find this place." Ioka reached into the water, lifted a handful, and let it slip through her fingers like falling stars. "Not chance," she whispered. "Destiny." The day Chief Victorio returned, the valley seemed to hold its breath. From the ridges, riders appeared, their ponies lathered with sweat, dust rising behind them like smoke. At their center rode a tall man, draped in a bison-hide cloak, his long hair streaked with silver, his face cut deep by years of war and burden. The village gathered, murmurs rippling through the crowd. James felt the weight of every eye upon him. He knew this man's name even before it was spoken, a name whispered in forts and ranch houses alike. Victorio, the Chiricahua chief feared across the Southwest. Victorio dismounted and strode directly to the lodge where Ioka rested. He knelt beside her, speaking softly in words James could not follow. Her hand rose weakly to touch her father's cheek. Whatever she said made his eyes darken with both grief and relief. Then Victorio rose and turned to face the people. His gaze swept across them before falling on James. For a long moment they measured one another, the rancher with dust in his hair, the chief with the weight of a nation on his shoulders. Nantan stepped forward, speaking in Apache, his voice low but urgent. James caught fragments: prophecy, sacred hands, sky-eyed stranger. When he finished, Sani added her voice, trembling with conviction. The crowd shifted, some nodding, others murmuring uneasily. Finally, Victorio raised his hand, and silence fell. In English thick but clear, he spoke directly to James. "My daughter lives because of you. My people know the prophecy. They say you are the man with eyes of the sky. If this is true, then your life is bound to hers. You will be her sacred husband." The words struck James like a hammer. Sacred husband. Marriage not just to Ioka, but to the destiny of her people. His throat went dry. He stepped forward, his voice hoarse. "Chief, I never asked for this. I'm no warrior of prophecy. I'm just a rancher, a man trying to do what's right." Victorio's eyes burned like coals. "A man does not choose prophecy. Prophecy chooses him. My daughter was promised to another warrior to bind two tribes in peace. That promise is broken. Now the spirits demand a greater promise, a union not of tribes, but of worlds." The crowd erupted, some in support, others in outrage. James heard the sharp voices of warriors, their eyes filled with fury. He felt the weight of choice pressing down. Refuse, and he would not leave the valley alive. Accept, and he would become part of something he barely understood. Ayoka's voice cut through the tumult. She stood in the doorway of her lodge, weak but steady. Her eyes found his, amber burning with quiet fire. "James," she said in English, the word fragile but clear, "I choose." The clearing stilled. All turned to her. She pressed her hand to her heart, then extended it toward him. "If you take me, I will walk with you, not as princess, not as promise, but as woman. I give myself to you." The world seemed to narrow to that moment, her hand outstretched, her eyes unyielding, the silence of the valley. James felt his heart pound like hooves across open prairie. He thought of all his years alone, the prayers whispered into empty nights, the verse his mother had read. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Matthew 5:9. Slowly, he stepped forward and took her hand. "Then I choose too." The valley erupted, not in war, but in song. The journey to explore the Wild West is still long. Subscribe to hear more true stories. If you're still watching right now, drop a 1 in the comments. Dawn painted the hidden valley in strokes of gold and rose. Smoke curled upward from lodge fires, carrying the scent of sage. Drums began to beat, slow, steady, echoing like the heartbeat of the earth itself. The people gathered in a wide circle, their faces solemn, expectant. James stood at the center beside Ayoka. She wore a dress of white deerskin adorned with turquoise beads and eagle feathers, each piece stitched with care by the women of the tribe. The light caught her hair, turning it to black fire, and James felt his chest tighten. She was radiant, not as a princess alone, but as a woman choosing her path. His own attire was simple yet sacred, a tunic of soft buckskin, a band of painted cloth tied across his brow, and in his hand a sprig of sage. Nantan adjusted the band firmly and muttered something in Apache that James didn't understand, but the nod of approval told him enough. Sani, the medicine woman, lifted her arms and began the ritual. Smoke from burning cedar wafted over James and Ayoka as she circled them, chanting words older than memory. 4 times they walked around a fire pit, one for each direction of the wind. On the final turn, an eagle soared overhead, its wings cutting across the rising sun. The people gasped, some wept. James's breath caught. He had seen eagles before on the ranch, but never like this, never with such piercing clarity, as if the bird itself had been summoned. The thought of chance fell away. This was no accident. At the fire's edge, a cup carved from buffalo horn was filled with water steeped in herbs. Sani raised it high, then passed it first to Ayoka, then to James. The water tasted of earth and rain, bitter yet pure. When he handed the cup back, their hands brushed, and a current seemed to pass between them. Victorio stepped forward, his voice strong though his eyes shimmered with emotion. "Daughter, today you walk from childhood into destiny. Stranger, today you are no longer stranger. You are bound to us by the will of the spirits and by your own choosing." He placed their hands together. For a heartbeat, silence filled the air. Then the drums quickened, voices rose in song, and the valley thundered with celebration. James squeezed Ioka's hand. He looked into her amber eyes and whispered words he had not spoken in years. "With all I am, I vow." And deep within, he felt the truth settle over him. The rancher who once roamed alone had found not only a wife, but a family, a people, a purpose. As the eagle circled one last time, James recalled the verse that echoed in his mother's voice long ago. "Therefore what God has joined together, let no one separate." Mark 10:9. He knew then, whatever storms lay beyond these mountains, he would face them not alone, but as one with Ioka. The wedding song still lingered in the valley air when the first warning came. A boy, breathless from running, burst into the clearing. He pointed toward the ridge and cried out in Apache words that needed no translation. "Soldiers." The celebration faltered. Drums fell silent. Mothers pulled children close, while warriors seized their bows, rifles, and spears. James felt the shift as surely as if the ground had cracked beneath them. Joy turned to dread in a single heartbeat. From the ridge, columns of dust curled skyward. Then came the faint but steady thunder of hooves. James's gut clenched. He knew that sound. He had ridden in formations like it before, long ago, before fate dragged him here. Colonel William Adams. The name came to him like a curse. Adams commanded 200 soldiers of the U.S. Army, the very regiment James had once served alongside. They had come not to parley, but to rescue him and punish those they believed had stolen him away. Victorio stood tall in the center of the clearing, his face carved in stone. "War comes," he said grimly. His people looked to him for orders, but his gaze shifted to James. "They come for you." The words hit harder than any bullet. James knew it was true. He was the spark that could set this valley aflame. Nanton spat into the dirt. "We fight." Around him, warriors shouted in agreement, their voices fierce, ready. But James felt a cold weight in his chest. He saw Ioka among the women, her amber eyes locked on his. Fear shimmered there, not for herself, but for him. She had just gained a husband. Would she lose him to war before the sun set? The dust on the horizon thickened. James could now make out flashes of sunlight on bayonets, the flutter of a flag. His heart pounded. He remembered the words of Victorio at the wedding. "You are bound to us by the will of the spirits and by your own choosing." There was no going back. If the army attacked, blood would soak this sacred ground. James swallowed hard, his voice low but steady. "If there's to be peace, it won't come from killing each other." Nanton's eyes narrowed. "Peace?" He gestured toward the ridge. "They bring only death." James looked to the horizon again. He had once believed the same, but the valley had changed him. He could not stand idle and watch slaughter unfold. Behind him, Ioka whispered his name, soft but sure. He turned to her, and for a moment the world quieted. The war drums, the marching feet, the weight of two nations. In her gaze, he saw not fear, but a plea. Choose the path that saves lives. James clenched his fists. He knew then what he must do. The storm was coming, and he would have to step into it. By nightfall, the army's campfires flickered on the horizon like a chain of fallen stars. The Apache village lay in tense silence, every lodge darkened, every warrior ready. The valley had never felt so fragile. James sat by the central fire, the crackle of flames loud in the hush. Around him, warriors sharpened blades, checked arrows, loaded powder into rifles. The women whispered prayers, braiding their children's hair as though preparing them for a journey none wished to take. Victorio stood apart, his profile lit in orange glow. At last, he turned to James. "They march at dawn. If you leave now, you may return to them. Say you were taken. Say you were captive. They will welcome you. My daughter and my people will fight their own battle." The words struck James like a blow. Return? Pretend this was not his war? For a moment, he felt the weight of temptation. He could ride away, vanish back into the world he once knew. But the thought of leaving Ayoka behind, her amber eyes, her laughter like soft bells, her courage, was unbearable. As if sensing his turmoil, Ayoka came to his side. She crouched close, her hand brushing his. "James," she whispered in careful English, "you go. Live. I strong." His chest tightened. She was offering him freedom, even at the cost of her own heart. It was love at its purest, a gift that cut like a knife. He shook his head, rough and final. "No, don't you see? My life stopped being mine the moment I found you bleeding in that canyon. If I walk away now, then all I've lived for, all I've prayed for, means nothing." Tears glimmered in her eyes, though her voice stayed steady. "You die here." James cupped her face in his calloused hands. "Then I die where I belong." The words rose from him with a clarity he had never known. For years he had wandered, a rancher with no family, no faith beyond the next sunrise. But here, in the heart of the Apache, he had found both. His voice carried louder now, not just to her, but to the warriors and women who listened. "I was once a soldier of the United States. I raised my hand and swore an oath. But that oath has led to nothing but graves and grief. Here I have found something worth living for and worth dying for. You are my family now." A hush swept the circle. Even Nantan, ever the skeptic, bowed his head. James's words echoed in the still night, and with them came a verse long buried in his heart, rising unbidden. "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." Matthew 5:9. He breathed it aloud, not as a soldier, not as a prisoner, but as a man remade. The breaking point had come, and he had chosen his side. Dawn broke with a sky the color of burnished copper. The first rays touched the peaks, spilling light into the valley where the Apache gathered in grim silence. Warriors lined the clearing, bows strung, rifles loaded, ready to meet death with dignity. James stepped forward, not in buckskin, but in his own weathered shirt and hat, the garb of a rancher who had nothing but his word. He carried no rifle, no pistol, only the weight of a choice that bound his life to theirs. Satina approached, her frame bent, but her eyes blazing with fire. From her medicine pouch she drew a necklace, a strip of leather strung with claws of bear and wolf, and at its center a turquoise stone that seemed to hold the sky within it. She pressed it against James's chest. "This," she whispered in English thick with accent, "stone of truth. Words cannot lie when it shines. Ancestors walk with you." James bowed his head. The stone was cool against his skin, yet warmth spread through him, steadying his hands. Victorio's voice carried across the assembly. "You ride alone, stranger, but not as prisoner. You ride as husband to my daughter, as son to my people. Whatever you speak today will bind us all." Nantan stepped close, gripping James's arm with a warrior's strength. "If you fall, we fight. But if you stand, perhaps our children will live." Ayoka came last. She placed her hand on his, her voice soft but unshaking. "James, you are bridge. Go, but come back." He kissed her forehead, lingering on the warmth of her skin. Then he mounted his horse, the leather creaking, the animal shifting beneath him as though sensing the burden it now carried. The valley opened before him, the path winding upward toward the ridges. Behind him, the Apache watched in silence, their prayers rising with the morning wind. Ahead, dust plumes rose higher as 200 soldiers advanced. James's heart pounded with every hoofbeat. Memories surged. Marching drills, shouted orders, the crack of rifles on the frontier. Once he had been one of them. Now he rode to face them, not as a brother in arms, but as a man who had chosen another family, another destiny. At the crest of the ridge, he drew rein. The army was spread across the plain below, a sea of blue coats and bayonets gleaming in the sun. At their head rode Colonel Adams, iron-backed, jaw set like stone. James lifted his chin. The turquoise stone glinted in the light, bright as fire. He pressed a hand to it, steadying his breath. "This is it," he murmured to himself. "No turning back." And with a kick of his heels, he rode down the slope toward the waiting guns. The army camp stirred as James descended the ridge. Soldiers gripped rifles, eyes narrowing at the sight of a lone rider in Apache garb. Murmurs rippled through the ranks. Some recognized him instantly. Others spat curses, traitor, deserter. Colonel Adams rode forward, tall in the saddle, his saber gleaming at his side. His voice rang out like a hammer on iron. "Sergeant James Donovan, you are under arrest for desertion, consorting with the enemy, and treason against the United States of America." The words cut through the morning air, but James did not flinch. He reined his horse to a halt 20 paces away, the turquoise stone at his chest catching the sun. "I am no deserter," he called, his voice steady. "I came here as a rancher, not a soldier. And I found not enemies, but people who bleed and hope as we do. I found a family." A murmur swept through the soldiers. Some glanced uneasily at one another, remembering raids, ambushes, massacres, and wondering now if the story was so simple. Adams sneered. "Family, with savages who butcher women and burn farms? You've lost your mind." James leaned forward in the saddle, his words sharp as a blade. "And what of the women and children slaughtered at Apache Pass? What of the treaties signed and broken by our own hands? Who are the savages then?" The turquoise stone flashed as he spoke, a strange light catching in its depths. The men stirred, shifting uneasily. James saw doubt flicker in their faces. Farm boys from Missouri, miners' sons from Ohio, men who had seen too much blood spilled and wondered why. Adams's face darkened. "Enough! You will be chained and court-martialed. Men, seize him!" But no soldier moved. They watched James, his voice carrying like a sermon across the field. "I do not come with a rifle. I come with a choice. Kill me, and you will start a war that drowns this land in blood. Hear me, and you may build peace that our children's children will thank you for." For a moment, silence stretched taut. Then a young corporal, no older than 20, lowered his rifle. "Sir, maybe we should hear him." Others murmured in agreement. Adams wheeled on them, furious. "You swore an oath." James lifted the turquoise stone for all to see. "So did I. But an oath to death is no oath worth keeping. I have found a greater calling. A man is not judged by the wars he fights, but by the peace he makes." The camp wavered, torn between obedience and conscience. Adams's hand went to his saber, his rage boiling over. But before he could draw, the sound of hooves thundered across the plain. A new column of riders approached, their leader's banner snapping in the wind. And James recognized him instantly. Captain Robert Lee had arrived. The new riders thundered into view, their banners snapping in the wind, their formation crisp. Dust billowed as they drew to a halt before Colonel Adams's lines. At their head sat Captain Robert Lee, his posture straight as an iron post, his eyes sharp beneath the brim of his hat. "Hold your fire!" Lee commanded, his voice cutting across the tension like a bugle. The soldiers of Adams' regiment hesitated, torn between their colonel's fury and the unexpected arrival of a superior officer. Adams spurred forward, his face livid. "Captain Lee, you have no authority here. This is my command, and that man is a traitor." He jabbed a finger at James, who still sat tall in the saddle, turquoise stone blazing in the sun. Lee's gaze moved from Adams to James, then back to the uneasy line of soldiers. "Colonel, I received a letter, signed by Chief Victorio himself, translated by a trusted interpreter. In it, he speaks of a man with eyes the color of the sky who saved his daughter and now serves as bridge between two worlds. That man is Sergeant Donovan." A murmur rippled through the ranks. Soldiers shifted, whispering. The prophecy, the whispers, the strange sense of destiny, they had all heard fragments. Now they stared at James as if seeing him anew. Adams barked a harsh laugh. "You'd trust the word of savages over your own officer?" Lee's jaw tightened. "I trust what I've seen, and I see a man who rode unarmed into 200 rifles, not to beg for his life, but to plead for peace. That is not the act of a coward or traitor. That is courage, rare even among soldiers." James felt the weight of the moment pressing down. He raised his voice so all could hear. "I am no longer a lone rancher, nor merely a soldier. I am a husband to Ayoka, daughter of Chief Victorio. My loyalty is to the truth, that both our peoples bleed red, bury their dead, and pray for tomorrow. The time has come to stop burying and start building." The turquoise stone at his chest seemed to flare with light as he spoke. A hush fell over the soldiers, many lowering their rifles. Lee turned back to Adams, his voice steel. "The general himself authorized me to explore any chance of peace. If you arrest this man, you will not only kill hope, but disobey direct orders from above. Stand down, Colonel." Adams's hand trembled at his saber. His face burned red, but he saw his men wavering, their faith crumbling. Slowly, with a snarl of rage, he pulled his horse back. Lee extended a hand toward James. "Ride with me. Let us speak with Victorio, not with guns, but with words." For the first time that day, James allowed himself a breath. He touched the turquoise stone, then glanced skyward where an eagle wheeled against the sun. Perhaps, just perhaps, peace was possible. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0, and please leave a comment and share your feelings. The ride back into the hidden valley carried a weight unlike any James had ever known. On one side rode Captain Lee, calm and resolute, the embodiment of a soldier who had seen enough of war to crave peace. On the other, James carried not just himself, but the hopes of 2 nations. Behind them, a cautious column of soldiers followed, their rifles lowered, their eyes uncertain. The Apache waited in silence. Warriors stood with bows strung, women gathered children close, elders raised their eyes to the sky. All knew this day would decide whether their world ended in blood or began anew in peace. Chief Victorio stepped forward, tall and unyielding as the mountains that ringed his valley. At his side was Ayoka, radiant though weary, her hand resting protectively on her father's arm. When her gaze found James, relief softened her features. Captain Lee dismounted, bowing his head in a gesture of respect unusual for a man in uniform. "Chief Victorio," he said, his voice steady, "I come not to conquer but to listen. Too long our peoples have spoken only with guns. Today let us try words." The chief's eyes narrowed, his silence as heavy as stone. Finally, he spoke, his English thick but clear. "Words are wind, Captain. Guns kill faster." Lee inclined his head. "Then let words be stronger than wind for once." James stepped forward, the turquoise stone warm against his chest. His voice rang out across the gathering. "I was born under the flag of the United States, but I have been reborn here among the Apache. I have seen children laugh in these valleys. I have seen fathers bury their dead. I know both sides cry the same tears. We can end that cycle here." Victorio's gaze hardened, yet there was no anger, only the weight of centuries of betrayal. "We have heard promises before, all broken." James met his eyes, steady. "Then let this promise be different, not written on paper to be torn by greedy hands, but written in lives. Mine is bound to yours. My wife is your daughter. My children will be both Apache and American. If I betray this peace, I betray my own blood." The valley stilled. Even the wind seemed to pause. Sani, the medicine woman, stepped forward, her staff thumping against the earth. She raised her voice in a chant that echoed like the voice of the ancients. Then she turned to the soldiers, her gaze sharp. "This man carries the truth. Spirits mark him. You see the stone shine." Many soldiers shifted uneasily. Some crossed themselves, whispering prayers. Lee looked between Victorio and James. "Then let us bind this with a treaty, not of conquest, but of honor. The Apache will keep their sacred mountains, free to live as they always have. In return, they will allow safe passage for settlers, and they will strike against no innocent. I will carry this treaty to my superiors and put my name beside yours." Victorio's eyes bore into James. "And you? Will you stand as bridge?" James swallowed, then nodded. "Until my last breath." A hush fell. Victorio lifted his hand skyward. "Then let the mountains hear. Let the spirits judge. Today we make peace." An elder brought forth a pipe carved from bison bone, inlaid with turquoise and eagle feathers. Victorio lit it, the fragrant smoke curling upward like prayers. He passed it to Lee, who drew and exhaled slowly, reverently. Then James took it, the smoke burning his throat but steadying his soul. As the pipe completed its circle, a great cry rose from the Apache. The soldiers stood still, humbled, as if they too knew they had witnessed something more than politics, something eternal. James looked at Ioka, her eyes wet with tears. She reached for his hand, and together they faced the rising sun over the sacred mountains. For the first time, he truly believed the land itself breathed with relief. 5 years passed, and the sacred mountains bore witness to a peace few had thought possible. The valleys where once war parties had gathered now rang with children's laughter. Deer grazed unafraid, streams ran clear, and the earth seemed to breathe easier. James Donovan was no longer the lone rancher who had wandered into destiny. He was now husband, father, and recognized agent of peace. His home stood at the meeting of two worlds. Half of it built in the Apache style of earth and wood, the other half with whitewashed boards and a porch that reminded him of Kentucky. It was not one thing or the other, but something new, born of both. On that porch he often sat with Ioka. Their son, Tayon, his name meaning hawk, raced with other boys across the meadow, his dark hair flying, his blue eyes gleaming like the morning sky. Their daughter, Sitlali, which meant star, toddled between her mother's skirts, amber eyes bright with wonder. James would watch them with a quiet awe. These children were not only his flesh and blood, they were living proof that two worlds could come together without destroying one another. They were the bridge he had promised to be. Visitors came often, soldiers curious about the treaty, settlers seeking safe passage, politicians hungry for stories of peace. Some came with suspicion, others with admiration. All left changed. For in the sight of James and Ioka's home, in the sound of their children's laughter, they saw something greater than politics or conquest. They saw hope. Sometimes, James walked the ridges alone, the turquoise stone still resting against his chest. He would pause where he had first ridden down to meet the army, remembering the fear that had gripped him. Now, instead of fear, he felt gratitude. Gratitude that God had not abandoned him in his loneliness, but had led him, step by step, to this place, this family, this purpose. On nights when the fire burned low, Ioka would rest against him and whisper, "Do you ever regret?" And he would smile, shaking his head. "Regret finding the only place I ever belonged? Never. The good Lord knew I was lost, and He found me here." She would close her eyes, and together they would listen to the wind through the canyon, as if the mountains themselves sang of peace. In time, the Treaty of the Sacred Mountains became legend. Delegations from far-off cities traveled to learn from it. Other tribes sought similar covenants. Even the Congress, skeptical at first, ratified the agreement, astonished by the stability it created. But for James, the true victory was not written in laws. It was written in the way Tayan and Sitlali grew up speaking both tongues, riding both ponies and plow horses, praying with words from both traditions. It was written in the way Apache elders taught him the songs of the earth, and in the way Ahioka read with him from the Bible his mother had left behind. On the cover page of that worn book, James had once underlined a verse, and now he read it often to his children. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Psalm 23:4. He would close the book, gather his son and daughter close, and remind them that fear had no place where faith and love lived. Years later, when storytellers gathered by the fire, they spoke of the sky-eyed stranger who came as an enemy but became a sacred husband, who bridged worlds not with a rifle but with open hands. They told how the mountains echoed with eagle's wings the day of his wedding, and how peace flowed like a river because he dared to choose love over war. And in the soft winds at dusk, when the sun spilled its last light over the peaks, it was said you could still hear the laughter of children, the whispers of lovers, and the voice of the mountains themselves, carrying the truth across generations. That love, once chosen, can change the world forever. When we listen to the wind across the desert or watch the sun sink behind the mountains, we are reminded that history is not only battles and treaties. It is love, sacrifice, and the quiet courage of ordinary people who chose hope over hatred. James and Ioka's journey is more than legend. It reflects the longing in every heart for belonging, forgiveness, and peace. Perhaps you too remember a time when choices were hard, when love or faith gave you the strength to keep going. These are the lessons the frontier still whispers to us. If stories like this move you, stay with us for more true Wild West stories. Tales of faith, resilience, and humanity in a world both harsh and beautiful. Subscribe, share, and let these echoes of the past remind us of what still matters most today.